Hi all, in this video we will learn how to call REST services using WebClient in a Spring Boot application. We will build two separate projects, address service and employee service, and we will demonstrate how employee service consuming the address service REST API using WebClient. The technology that we will be using are Spring Boot, Java, 17, MySQL, Postman, and IntelliJ IDEA. We will be covering the below concept like what is web client and its real life use cases. As I mentioned, we will create the two different Spring Boot application with Spring Initializer. We will discuss the different web client method and their practical use case. We will follow up the standard software development methodology in our application, and also the demo will be there of consuming address service REST API using the employee service. Lastly, we will discuss the alternative for this web client is REST template, whether we can use this REST template or not. So let's get started. So before moving ahead with the video, I request you please subscribe to the channel to get videos on Spring Boot microservices and software development. And now, what is actually a web client? So web client is a reactive non-blocking HTTP client that was introduced in Spring 5, replacing the older REST template. So it's offer a flexible and fluent API for making the HTTP call. So real life example. So imagine if you have microservice architecture where employee service need to fetch the details from the address service to display the employee full information. So instead of making blocking calls that may slow down the application, so web client efficiently handles this communication in a non-blocking way. So let's create the two different project called address service and employee service from Spring Initializer. So I will open Spring Initializer, then select language as Java, project as Maven 3.3.4 as a Spring Boot version, group ID I will mention as the developer, artifact ID as employee service. We create two different service. One is employee service and other is the address service. So this is demo project of our Spring Boot to understand web client use case. I'll use Java 17 version. As it is a RESTful services, so I'll using Spring Web, and as I mentioned, we'll be using the web client to call HTTP methods or HTTP API. So for that, there is a one dependency called Spring Web Reactive, where we have web flags from where that web client is being called. So we'll be using JPA for connect with the database, and we'll be using MySQL driver for the database connectivity. So I will generate this project and I will open an IntelliJ IDEA. Similar way, I will create a project of address service with the same details, and we need to have the same dependency. So I will generate and open this on IntelliJ IDEA. So I have imported this address service and it employee service. So I will open first address service. I will go to pom.xml file and I will add as Maven project. Till it being loaded, let me discuss that in this address service we will be having one API to fetch the address details by using employee ID. So we will implement that API, as well as we will do some configuration on properties file where we will be having all the database things, and other port also will modify port also. Dependencies has been imported, and we have seen that web flags is there. So I will open this application.properties file and I will add all the properties that required to connect with MySQL. Let me add those. So I have added the details like context part. So from this is the root or the base URL from this, from where the application will be accessed or the API will be accessed, and I have connected with MySQL with the DB name as MyDB, and I used that JDBC driver. So I will go to this Java file, application file. I will create entity file with having the address details. Let me create that package as entity. So package is created. I will create a class called address. So I have created the address entity with entity queue annotation, and table name I have made address having ID, city, state, and employee ID, and I have created the data setter for that. So let me create a repository class. So I'll create a package and I will create the repository class. So a repository interface has been created. So I will create one of the class called address response. So where I will store the response while calling the address API. Let me create that. So I have created this address response with ID, city, and state only. And one thing I forgot to mention. So in this JPA repository, I have created one field that find by employee ID. So it is coming from JPA. So when the employee ID is passed, so it will return that address for this specific employee ID. So before creating the service class for this address, there should be one configuration class where we need to made all the configuration details. So let me create that first. So I have created this configuration called app configuration, where configuration related to the application will be made here, and I have created a bean called model mapper. So use of this model mapper is to map the response to the a particular class. For example, here the response is address response. So this is will be help to map the object to that specific response. To use that model mapper, we need to import the dependency. So I will go to the Chrome and I will open MVN repository, call the Maven repository, and from there I will import model mapper. I will search here model mapper. So in the first link is there model mapper. We can use the latest version only, 3.2.1. So as we are using Maven project, so we'll copy this dependency. If you are using Gradle, then you can copy this. So I have copied it. This go to this pom.xml file for this application and I'll add there. I will add somewhere here and I will reload the project. To reload, you can go to this Maven and reload project. So this dependency will be imported. So while the dependency is being imported, so I will create one packages called service and I will do the service implementation to get this find by ID, find by employee ID. Let me create that. So I have created this address service with the service as annotation and I have auto add this address repository and this model mapper. So if we see that the find by address by employee ID, so it is calling the find by employee ID we have just created here. and the mapper is used to map whatever the response we are getting with this address response class, and it is returning the things. So why app configuration showing error? So we need to import it here, import class. It is importing from a model mapper only. So I will create a controller class having the API called finding the address details by employee ID. Let me create that. So I will create a package called controller. On controller, I will create class called address controller. So I have created this address controller annotated with REST controller, and I have auto-add this address service. The get mapping is there with employee ID. When employee ID will be passed, then it will call this find address by employee ID on the service class, and it will pass a status code as OK with body. So I run the application. So before running the application, let me explain you again the project structure that I have used. So initially it should have one entity which is called address. So then address should have the repository where all the repository things will be put here, and this address should pass some response whenever the API is being called. So this is the response class for that, and all the business logic, all the service related information is being written here, and all the configuration, app configuration should be written here, and the controller I have written here. So let me run this application. It will take some times to run the application. So the application is started successfully with port as 81 and with base address as address service. One thing I forgot to mention, like if you have application that properties file now, so this whatever DB you are using, that should be up. So I will open my workbench, and I will use user name as a root and password as a root, and I will open this MyDB. So MySQL workbench is open. So I will use root. So it is loading, taking some time to open. So address is table created successfully, and I will use as MyDB, and I will check what details is there on address. So address is having empty fields because we did not put anything. Let me put some details with ID, city, employee ID, and state. So I have used some SQL command. This insert into address values with ID, city, employee ID, and the state name. When I execute, and I will rerun this select star from address query. So the address details is coming fine. So now go back to the application and go back to this address controller class. We have this API. We need to test this API whether the details are coming or not, because this API only be used by the employee services, right? So before employee service use this API, so we should make sure this API is working fine. So as the base services, base API is this one, address services, and with 881 port, I will open this. So let me open the Postman, and I will hit the API. So I have opened the Postman. The port is localhost 881. So localhost 881, and the base address is address service /address/employee ID. So it will be address service dot address /ID, right? Because we go there, the address service /address/employee ID. So with address, what details is there with IDS employee ID is 1, details is Bangalore and Karnataka. So I click on the send. So details is coming with the IDS 1, state Bangalore and Karnataka. So our one of the service is working fine. So we'll create a, a different service called employee service. On this employee service also we have this similar configuration or the similar details, except we'll be using the app configuration. Instead of address controller, we'll be use employee controller, entity as address, and similarly the repository as the uh, employee repository, and response will be using address response as well as the employee response, because on the employee response it will be storing the values of employee as well as the address. I will create now only, so no need to be worried. And the service, there will be a employee service and little bit change on application.publish file. Let me create those things and I will explain you then. So before creating, I will go to this form.xml file for the employee services, and I will add as Maven project, and I will reload all the dependency. Let me stop this address service as of now. While it complete, after completing the employee service, we'll run the both service and we'll hit the API. This employee service source file, go to this main and the resource tab. So all this information I will be paste here, like port name 8080 and the context path as employee service, and the address service base path we are using the address service, right? And also we'll be using the DB details here, and I have already changes the configuration controller and the entity, all the things on the employee service. Let me show you those one by one. So in the entity we have employee entity. So employee should have ID, name, email and age, and we have response also, the employee response and address response. Response should be there because we need to map the response that is coming from the address API to this address response. And the employee response should have all the details of employee along with the address response. In the repository we have just created an JP repository, and we need to import this employee as well. This part is imported. In the configuration file is also there. File we have this address base URL, and the module mapper. Similarly, we need to add the pom.xml file on this dependency, so that module mapper will be imported. I will go to this pom.xml file. I will add this and I will reload the project. Maven reload project. So once it's reload, this configuration issue will be removed, and we have created bin, and there is web client we have used. So web client.builder.base URL. Base URL is the address base URL, and with .build. So there is no issue in this file. And let me show you this service file. I created an employee service. So I will import this all the things. Then I will show you how we are fetching the details. So we have created whatever the employee repository, then model map. Similarly, we need to map those response with a specific class, and we are using web client to call the external API. So here we are using employee repo, then find by ID, means the employee details will be fetched by using ID, and here mapper is used. So response will be mapped with employee response. If we check this, employee response have ID, email, and age. So where is there employee service? So age is there, and this web client we will fetching the address response. So in the web client, as it is the get response, we check this, right? It is a get API, so address service slash address slash one. So dot get and with URI. So address is the URI plus ID will be passing from this argument, and we will be using a retrieve function to get the details, and will mock mono body to mono, means it will map with address response. So if we check this address response, it is have the all the details, and then we will use dot block, then the response will be there, and we will set the address of the employee with address response. To get more information about the web client, you can check the official documentation of the web client. Let me show you that also. The lot of method is there: get, post, put, head. So in the get method, we are using the start building an HTTP GET request. In response, it will be specification and specifying the target URL. So the response will be mapped with a specific class. We'll go back to there. So we have created these services. Now we'll go to this controller class, and the employee controller will import this package. We have imported. Let me explain you that. So employee service have a REST controller, and auto add this employee service, and the get mapping would, it will fetch by ID. So we have passed this path variable as ID, employee service dot get employee by ID. So here it will call the external API. Then it will show the status code as OK, and the response as employee response. So let me run this application. So before running this application, we should have the address application up. So I will do that first. Up that. So once this address service is successfully up, then only I'll up this employee service. So address service is being built successfully, and it is also being run successfully at 882 port. Now I will run the employee service application. I'll click on here and I'll run it. It will also take sometimes to build, and it will run on 80 port. So employee service also built successfully and also run successfully at 88 port with base URL as employee service. So I'll go to Postman. So before going to Postman, I'll go to this MySQL and check whether employee table is created or not. So before address table is there, and we have checked that also earlier. We have refreshed the DB. The employee table is created, and I will use the select star employee query to check what details is there on employee. So on employee table, there is no details is there. So we'll create some dummy details. So I will use this query. Now you can recheck this. So details is there with the ID, age, and employee name. So we'll now go to this Postman, and I will hit the API. Which API? This API, employee slash ID, employee service slash employee slash ID with port as 8080. So I will open the new tab. On there I will write as localhost 8080 employee service slash employee, and we'll hit that one. So before hitting, I'll hit the address service also. So whether with one we are getting details again or not. So just we are reconfirming this, then only we will hit that next API, the employee details API. So the address where this details is getting, and if we hit this API, we should get the details, because using web client we are calling the external or the other microservices API. So as you see, this ID we are getting from the table. So in the table with one, it is 25A Subhadeep and name is Subhadeep. So the details is coming, and with one ID the Bangalore and Karnataka is coming, which we already validate using this API. So that's all with the video. Please subscribe to the channel to get the videos on the software development. Thank you for watching.